In this class we're going to talk about the business planning process. This is part one of 3 videos on this topic, so it is quite a long topic. I suggest strongly that you stop the video from time to time and make your own notes. Use the slider at the bottom of the video to move it forwards and backwards, and pad out the material with your own researches, online researches perhaps. But for the moment, let's make a start at part 1. And we'll start by looking at the problem of dealing with uncertainty. And that's why the plan comes into existence. Planning is a way of coping with uncertainty. It formulates courses of action to achieve specified results. So a plan is a way of dealing with the uncertainty of the future. It's having something in place in the event of some adverse factor or some indeed favourable factor in the future arising, so the plan may deal with it or exploit the opportunity as the case may be. So a plan is really aimed at this idea of dealing with uncertainty. And we can identify 3 forms of uncertainty. First one is state uncertainty. These are forces external to the business that can generate uncertainties. An earthquake, a war, something sudden and unforeseeable. But these are state uncertainties. There's nothing that the business can do about these. These are external, but we all live in a world which is subject to change, and there are things happening around us all the time, good things and bad things, but we can't influence them. Effect uncertainty. This is when the external forces are unpredictable. You see, state uncertainty, we may have an indication of what's going to happen. If 2 countries are not getting along and there's a likelihood of war, generally speaking, we have some knowledge of that in advance and how it will affect us, the community, the business, our own personal lives. Effect uncertainty is when these are unpredictable. The earthquake, as I said earlier, there may be areas that are prone to earthquakes, so it may be factored in more fully, but at the same time, when they do happen, they tend to be a surprise. And we've also got response uncertainty. This happens when the outcomes of decisions are unpredictable. So sometimes the business has to make a decision, but it's not entirely sure what the outcome of that decision will be. They're hoping it'll be good, but it may not be. So we can identify 3 types. The external forces, which may have some element of predictability, so some small element of predictability. The effect uncertainty, which are unpredictable, just something happens, suddenly a new product arrives, a new innovation that changes the whole market. Or response uncertainty, when the business makes a decision, implements the decision, but are not entirely sure as to what the outcome will be, what the precise outcome will be. So the starting point for the plan, well, the starting point is the business, its opportunities and its environment. So it's looking at the organizational structure, the mission and its direction. So the organizational structure, how the business is constructed, the mission as in what precisely is the objective of the business. This could be as short as maybe 20, 25 words. Just focuses in on precisely what the business is trying to do and the direction of the business, where it wants to be in 2 years or 5 years' time. So the plan takes those 2 and puts them under this idea of the plan. And the plan leads to a planning exercise. And The planning exercise looks at the organization and the structure and control framework of the organization. So the plan, to generate the plan, a planning exercise is set up. It must first of all look at the organization, how the organization is structured and how it's controlled. How management have structured. Is it a tall organization, a flat organization? How are the different divisions worked out, the different departments? What's the relationship between them? How is it controlled as well? Is it controlled by hierarchically, by managers in a hierarchy, or is there more autonomy at the shop floor level? So that needs to be looked at. Then there's staffing. And it's necessary to identify the skills and the training needed to implement a new proposal, implement the business plan. Communication. There must be an effective communication system within the organization, a reliable one, one in which data can accurately pass, records are kept, backups are kept, and information is processed. And this runs right throughout the organization, from the shop floor level to the very senior management. There must be a good channel of communication through the organization. There must be a way of motivating and leading. Leadership is important because workers and staff look to the leader for guidance, and the leader must be capable of motivating the workforce, getting them engaged in the business so that the outcomes can be achieved, more effectively achieved, I suppose. There should be some way of controlling the business. That means looking at, in terms of the plan, looking at any gaps that arise between the actual and the planned. The planned output was a certain amount, the actual output was less, there is a gap. How is it addressed? And this idea of fixing the gap runs right throughout the time period that the business is in operation. Whenever there are gaps of that nature, then there is something wrong. The plan may have been too optimistic, or it could be there are inefficiencies in the organization that need to be addressed. So the type of responses to uncertainty, well, people may be defenders, try to avoid uncertainty where possible. This means they are reluctant to innovate and develop new products. Well, defenders are not necessarily good things. They're not good assets in the business, because if they're too cautious, the business will ossify. It'll fix in time. The products will become old and dated, and the consumers will turn against them. So defenders, not necessarily a good thing. Which means we must live with some degree of uncertainty if we are to have vibrant business. Prospectors. These are managers within the business who are looking for new opportunities and innovations. Prospectors are constantly looking out for new ways to do things and new ways to innovate, and what they're trying to do is to avoid the uncertainty of the market by perhaps creating a range of products. If one dies off, the second one in the product range will be there, so that the risk and the uncertainty has been somehow balanced off. One goes down, one goes up. But prospectors are just a mindset, I should say, which leads people to look for new opportunities and innovations. They are, I suppose, the opposite of the defenders. And then we have the analyzers. Well, the analyzers are in contestable markets. That means markets where competitors can easily come in and start competing with the company. But in contestable markets, the analyzers follow and imitate tried and tested products of the market leader. So in a market setting, if one product is very, very successful, then the competitors will try to copy it, because that avoids the research and development costs and reduces uncertainty. So if a car manufacturer comes up with a new designed car with new innovations and they prove to be very successful in the marketplace, the other car manufacturers will try to adopt those. These are the analyzers. And finally, we have the reactors, those who respond to problems rather than anticipating them and taking corrective action in advance. It may be a mindset that says, we'll wait for it to break first. When it breaks, we'll fix it. Don't anticipate it breaking. So there is no real plan or foresight about what happens if it breaks. Just when it breaks, it's fixed. These people react to what happens. They don't anticipate the issues. Different planning models could be conceived of as well. The so-called command and control model, based on the military. It's a top-down style. The top management issues its views on the situation, on the plan, and the people underneath, the managers underneath that, implement it. So there's a rigid adherence to the plans. The top management say what is required, and middle management implement it, and it goes all the way down through the organization. There is no real discussion. That's the way it is. There's also a contingency model. This is a flexible style of management. It involves consultation and participation in the planning process. And any unexpected changes to the market or to the environment are dealt with flexibly. So this contingency model, there's more consultation amongst the staff, more discussion, more feedback, and criticism is sought and perhaps acted on. So the planning process, well, what is a plan? Put simply, it's a specific documented intention to do something or to act in a specific way. A good plan should state the objective. That's what the plan is aiming to achieve, and the means of achieving that object, the means. So a plan should state what is to be achieved, when it is to be achieved, and how it will be achieved. Now, the essential components of good planning, well, there must be an acceptance of a planning culture. The people who are going to implement the plan must have accepted that the plan was necessary, and that we live in a world where plans are doing a function. They're trying to get rid of or reduce the uncertainty. There must be an acceptance of the planning culture, that it's a necessary thing to do. And there must be broad agreement on the type of planning to be pursued. There must be broad agreement that how the plan is derived, how much consultation there was at the beginning, and how people were involved, and how opinions and inputs into the plan were dealt with. There must be broad agreement that it was going in the right direction. Otherwise, there won't be commitment to it. There must be clear and acceptable objectives in the short, the medium, and the long runs. The short run might be the next year. The medium may be the next 2 or 3 years. And the long run might be anything above that. Depends on the nature of the business, but there must be clear and acceptable objectives. They must be aiming for something which is clear and precise, and the people who subscribe to the plan know where it's going, where it's taking the business. And there must be agreement about the priorities that the plan has set out. If the plan is aiming at something that is contentious within the management, that not everyone thinks they should be aiming there, they should be aiming someplace else, there won't be commitment to the plan, there won't be loyalty to the plan. And there should be agreement about the structure of the planning and control cycle, how it's going to be implemented, how it's going to be controlled, and particularly if things go wrong, what mechanisms are in place to take corrective action. The organisational mission, well, a mission statement is a formal but clearly written statement in the public domain and has the following characteristics. It explains or defines the organisation for its key stakeholders. It explains and defines the organisation. It tells the key stakeholders what the organisation is and what it does and what it's aiming to do. But it does it in a very laconic fashion, in a very short, brief fashion, brief way, few words. It should, of course, create a positive image of the business, of the organisation. It shouldn't be destructive. It should be truthful, but not destructive. And it should inspire the stakeholders. People reading it think they want to identify with that organisation. It's a good organisation to identify with. But it specifies how the core vision will be achieved, how the core vision of the business, what precisely the business is aiming to do, how that will be achieved. And the mission statement should indicate that. It identifies the key priorities of the organisation. The minor priorities, these can be left to another place, but the key ones are set out in this statement. And insofar as it does all of that, it creates sort of a bond between the organisation and the stakeholders. They have a short, snappy way of looking at the organisation, a short statement that indicates what the business is, where it's going, what it's aiming to do, and does it in a positive fashion, so the stakeholders want to relate to that business. It may not be long, it could be 20, 25 words. It's not a long statement. But because it's simple and short, it can lead to cohesion. It binds stakeholders and managers and the management, the organisation and whoever else is involved. It binds them together because they have a short, quick way of looking at this perhaps very complex organisation, but it's a short statement and the stakeholders can understand and follow that easily. Now the types of planning, well, there's strategic planning. It's really long term and it focuses on the direction of the business. Intermediate planning, well, it's intermediate. It's in between the long and the short, so it's intermediate. But it concerns longer term operational issues. In other words, it concerns the issues of the organisation as currently constructed, whereas strategic could be looking at an entirely new form of business in the future, perhaps a new type of plant, a new location, a totally new way of doing things. The intermediate plan takes the existing business but looks at the long-term implications of having that business but just doing things different within it. So whereas strategic could be 5 years off or 10 years off, intermediate planning could be 1 or 2 years off. And of course operational planning is concerned with the very practical issues of delivering the product now. It looks at the efficiency of the production process. It looks at the efficiency of the organization. And I suppose in terms of pyramids and diagrams, we have top management, middle management and lower management in the managerial pyramid. And we have planning horizons. The top management look after strategic. The middle management, they tend to deal with intermediate. Obviously consultation with the top management. And lower management tend to be more operational, looking at the very short period. But obviously linking with the middle management. So the top management would typically be the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer, and perhaps heads of the divisions. Middle management would be functional managers and departmental heads, looking at particular jobs to do, particular areas of responsibility, and perhaps looking at the department to look after the intermediate considerations of the business. And lower management would be unit managers or line managers who will be dealing with day-to-day issues. Now the planning horizon. This is a period in which the planning process is started and concluded. So it's the length of time that the planning process is from start to end. That's the planning horizon. Typically the planning horizon length is longest for the strategic stage and shorter for the other two stages, the intermediate and the operational. But for the strategic stage, obviously there are a lot of complicated issues. Complicated not least because you're looking into the future. You're looking to maybe a 5-year period. Well, we don't know what the world will be like in 5 years' time. So in order to mitigate uncertainty associated with that planning phase, a lot of research may be required, a lot of consultation, expert opinion may be sought. So typically speaking, generally speaking, the planning horizon for strategic planning is much longer than for intermediate and operational. Planning content and style. Well, an end that can be reasonably achieved within an expected framework and with available resources. That's businessdictionary.com's definition of objectives. An end that can be reasonably achieved within an expected time frame and with available resources. So, writing good objectives. Well, they should be measurable. Objectives should be measurable, ideally in quantitative terms. That enables benchmarking. That enables to say unambiguously this objective has been achieved or not achieved. If the objective is to grow sales by 5% next year, 5% is quantitative. If sales grow by 4% next year, that benchmark, that objective was not met. And that's not open to interpretation. That is fact. That's the number system. So good objectives ideally should be measurable. The focus of the planning exercise should be clear. That should be the core. What is the whole focus of this planning exercise? When the product or output is required, that could be, again, it's measurable. It's required on the 1st of January. So if it's required on the 1st of January, if it's delivered in February, the objective was not met. If it was delivered in December before the deadline, then that was good. Overachievement. How the production should be organized and measured. Well, some parts of the production process may be measurable, some may not. and it depends critically on the nature of the business. We're talking here as if this is a production-based business, an engineering type business where there are inputs and outputs. If it's a service sector industry, perhaps an accountancy firm, it may be a bit more difficult to apply many of the views that are coming up here. They can be applied, but more careful thought has to go into them, perhaps, and what they mean in the context of the service sector. But how the production should be organized and measured in terms of, let's say, an accountancy procedure, well, the accountant will do the accounts. If you're building a car, how it will be organized, there may be more people involved and a longer chain of production. So measurability may be applied at each stage, whereas in the accountancy case, the accountant may be given a week to do a particular set of accounts. So this is an introduction to the planning framework, and that's our starting point. This is part one of three videos in this part. It's important that you look at the other two as well. As I said, use the slider on the video to move forwards and backwards and stop it, make notes, and pad out your own notes to make sure you have a good understanding of what's meant by planning and the issues associated with the planning exercise. But for the moment, I want to leave that, and thank you for watching.